catastrophe. It's not what you feel.
Okay, so this is a talk on the Banishing ritual, the Lesser Pentagram. Very common ritual. This will be kind of a high level overview of the ritual. I won't go too detailed into the specifics. Just kind of wanted to give a broad overview. And this talk was kind of birthed a couple weeks ago. Jeremy Barish and I believe Stephanie, you were on that call, but basically we did I was just thinking, as we're doing magical work, having a kind of routine, um, you know, energetic, hygienic work might be beneficial for the group. And so wanted to talk about one of my favorite rituals, which is the banishing ritual, the Lesser Pentagram. So and you see here the image of a lighthouse. And basically, when we're doing any kind of consciousness raising work or any kind of energy work, you tend to light up in the astral world. And that's, anything really yoga, meditation, things like this, um, can attract unwanted attention. And so, especially magical work. And so, when you light up like this, you're essentially making yourself, attractive to entities or beings who may, want to either siphon energy off or kind of, attach themselves and whatnot. So um, this ritual really helps with that. And it's a way to kind of not only practice energetic hygiene or to prevent unwanted influence, but it's also a way to balance oneself. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit. And so, I do want to preface this again. I'm not an expert. This is not something, or, please do not think of me as like a pro or an expert. It take what resonates from this and leave the rest, as we all know. But and like I said, it's going to be kind of a broad overview of my own understandings of this ritual. So before we start, though, the best way to learn is, of course, by doing. You can read books, you can kind of listen to lectures, watch videos and stuff like that. But the best teacher is, of course, going to be yourself. And so I really encourage anyone watching this and anyone on the call to basically start performing the ritual daily, and you'll see the results yourself, and you'll kind of learn how this works intuitively, and you'll kind of start understanding the correspondences. You'll start understanding a lot more about yourself and a lot more about what this ritual can do and the power of this ritual. So what is it? What is the Banishing Ritual of the Lesser Pentagram? And I think we all have kind of a basic understanding of it. Of course, we've seen Jeremy do it and others before channeling sessions, but a very broad overview is it's a ceremonial practice used in Western esoteric traditions. And its primary purpose is to clear unwanted energies from a space. It's traditionally used before a magical ritual in an environment that hasn't been used before. So I remember visiting Jeremy during a channeling session last summer, and the space that we were using was a common area, and it was obviously there's all sorts of influences throughout the week that get kind of built up in there. And so Jeremy, for the first few days before the actual training session, went in and cleared the space. And one of the first things I noticed when I went was that it was a completely neutral environment. It felt neutral, and that's kind of the goal of the ritual when it comes to an environment. You want to, it's used to clear energies, good and bad, from a space. And why is it called the lesser ritual? Well, it's because it deals with more foundational energies, and it's not because it's less important. It's kind of a misnomer. It's not lesser as in it's on a hierarchy scale. It's lesser because it's dealing with foundational elemental forces. And it's in contrast to something like the greater pentagram ritual, which is used to invoke or banish, like planetary energies. So what you're doing here is you're more focused on the ground level, so to speak. And these are the forces that kind of, are about us in our day-to-day kind of thing, if that makes sense. And it originates from the Golden Dawn tradition, and it's taught to neophytes, or people who are new to magic, or people who are on the path to adulthood. And it's done because magical work attracts attention and from astral entities, and if left unchecked, it can cause problems for the adept, or for the neophyte. Therefore, it's taught to them so they can clear their space and also clear themselves of unwanted energies. And it has another purpose, which I'll kind of get into a little bit later, but that's kind of the main reason why it's taught to new adepts, or neophytes. And it's also considered very foundational for other rituals. So the concepts that you learn from doing the banishing ritual apply to all other rituals, at least in the Golden Dawn system. So it's very foundational, and you learn a lot. Again, it's like as you do the ritual, you learn a lot about the correspondences, the kind of archetypal forces that you're invoking, and things like this. And it just kind of comes to you, and as you practice, you begin understanding this stuff a lot more. And so that's why it's really taught and encouraged for neophytes to do it. Pretty much every day is what is recommended. So it's not really about mastering, emotions or words or things like this. It's really kind of a lifelong practice. And the banishing ritual is kind of a fascinating ritual because it's so simple, yet it's so complex at the same time. There's a lot that goes into it. It gets very deep, um, and there's a lot of stuff you can do with it beyond just simply banishing. And it's one of those rituals that, like, you could, if you just spent your entire magical your entire life focusing on magic, and you only focus on the pentagram ritual, you would get a lot out of it. That's basically what it is. It's so powerful and so deep that you can really take away more than just the kind of the surface level information. Uses of the ritual. So, big war. So the main use of the ritual, like I said, it clears energy from a room, right? It renders a space neutral. And you do this because you don't want lower thought forms to interfere with your magic. And the effect has been described as almost completely wiping a space clear, like almost like a nuclear bomb. That's kind of the idea. It's like you're you're forcing this energy out. You're kind of, your will is pushing this energy away, and so your environment is completely clear. Now, the problem comes in is if you clear energy that you want to keep, because again, it's not just banishing negative energy, it's also banishing anything that's positive in the environment. So if you have a room that you want to keep sacred, and have a specific energy, if you are constantly banishing in that environment, you can run the risk of, clearing away energy that you may want to keep. So it's important to understand that, in terms of in terms of the use of the ritual, for clearing an environment, that that can be one of the downsides to it. If someone's asking a question, I can't see Google Meet. I just see PowerPoint. So feel free to chime in.
It's me asking a question. It's Autumn.
Oh, hey, Autumn.
Hey, it sounds like kind of like antibiotics.
Yeah.
Like, so there's like a energetic microbiome that of just like energies, I won't even say entities. And like you may need to use, okay, I'm making the analogy without, I don't want to sound like I'm assuming that it's a parallel, that there's parallels. It's a question. It still remains a question. So like you might feel like you really need to bring out the antibiotics, but it's like something that you really want to consider because just like you said, you're wiping it all out. And then you have to like really establish you have to work afterwards to establish like a stable colonization microbiome. So like you want to establish colonies that are stable so that they are resilient to infiltration from anything that just happens along. And so I guess I wonder about that, like because energies are potentially moving through all the time. And if you have if you've worked to really create a stable, energetic environment that's like resilient and healthy for your home, your family, or whatever, then it would be like something to consider, bringing out such kind of like big guns, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's very accurate. I think it, you know, it is said that, you know, you shouldn't necessarily banish in the same environment all the time, you know, unless, again, if you want to clear that space. But I love that analogy of like antibiotics, of like um a way to kind of, you know, um develop that resilience. And that kind of leads into my next slide here, which really is one of the other purposes of the ritual, is to strengthen the aura. And I think this kind of aligns with a little bit about what you were saying. Um, you can almost think of it like antibiotics, but also like as a way to strengthen the immune system, right? The energetic immune system of yourself. And so I love this quote here from Damien Eccles. If you guys don't know him, he's an amazing magician. Wrote some really great books. Actually, he's known because he was falsely accused of murder in prison. He was on death row, and he got exonerated because of DNA evidence that showed he did not do it. But he was in death row for like 20 years, and he practiced that's where he learned about magic and practicing. And he's just an amazing individual, very, very wise. But this quote is really great. I love it. It says, "Regular practice strengthens and hardens the aura, shielding one from external energies and influences." And it really does do that, right? So it's not just about preparing a space for ritual. I think its most beneficial purpose for individuals is a way to strengthen your aura, to strengthen your energetic body. And you know, it's just like going to the gym, right? Repeated performance enhances results. And so it's essentially what you're doing is you're creating a shield around you, which helps keep your mental environment clear, basically. And you know, one of the side effects that I've noticed myself is that after performing the ritual for a while, you notice that things bother you less, right? You become much less reactive, much more clear-headed, balanced, and so forth. And it's not that you become stoic or anything like that, but it's that you're less reactive to external energies because you have that, you're strengthening that boundary around you, if that makes sense.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when I read this quote, and I do know Damien Eccles, I have a lot of respect for him. You know, I think I see strengthening and hardening your aura as not necessarily the same thing.
Mm.
And I think that, you know, when like boundaries are really important, you know, but hard boundaries are themselves almost reactive.
Mm.
And that, you know, the ability to really be able to be affected by other people, by other energies, isn't synonymous with being reactive
Mm-hmm.
energies. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
No, that's a really good point. And I think the language hardens. I do see what you mean there. And I think it's, you know, what I interpret it is that it's just strengthening, really. You know, it's just about creating that protection so that you could walk into fire, you know, and not get burned, basically. You know, of course, easier said than done. But
I bet Damien Eccles wanted it to be hard. Let me just say that.
yeah.
Like
yeah,
it
yeah,
probably,
yeah.
if it makes you more powerful, it makes it more powerful for what you want, what you can envision, what your scope of imagination is.
Absolutely. And that's one of the other things, you know, it does help strengthen, you know, it just overall helps with you know, with everything related to your energetic body, you know, and that relates to your ability to visualize, ability to stay clear-headed, ability to think clearly, to
ability to let things pierce us and balance it anyway.
Yeah, Exactly. Right. Yeah. And it's not that, obviously, performing this ritual daily obviously has those benefits, and it's not like you can suddenly you're enlightened and nothing bothers you, but it's like, okay, you know, I I I understand why this emotion's coming up inside of me. It's like you gain a greater awareness about these things, which helps you balance it quicker, basically. At least I've noticed that for myself. Um, and the other benefit is it you can literally banish things from your reality. This is the other that I found, one of the other uses of the ritual, right? So you can use to banish unwanted material, emotional, or energetic issues that you may have. For example, you can use a ritual to prevent specific things from coming into your home, for instance, right? Or at least help with that, right? You can remove an unwanted thought or emotion, right? You can modify the ritual to banish that specific thing. It's a little bit more advanced work with the ritual, but kind of the point of me saying that is that the ritual works both externally in our environment and also internally within ourselves, right? So it works externally in the sense that you can clear an environment, make it neutral. It works within ourselves by strengthening our energy body, and also you could remove things from once you become adept enough at it, you could remove the possibility of that reality coming true, if that makes sense. um it is interesting to note that some people who perform this ritual, when they first start, they report that when they're doing this ritual on a regular basis, that some things in their life that weren't serving them end up falling away. So there are some reports of people who have lost jobs shortly after performing the ritual, have lost spouses, relationships falling apart, stuff like that. And there is a tendency to blame the ritual and whatnot, but actually what's happening is that you're banishing things that aren't serving your highest good. And so if that happens, right, it's for your highest good, and ultimately it works out in their favor. So anyway, so I just wanted to kind of preface that, saying, not saying it's going to happen if you start performing this daily, but there are reports of people that have happened to certain people. Not trying to put any kind of fear out there, but that is one of the things, because again, you're willing yourself, you're using your will to banish what doesn't serve you, if that makes sense. And this quote from Israel Regardie explains that. He's an amazing author. If you guys don't know him, I highly recommend his work. But as a protection against impure magnetism, the banish ritual can be used to get rid of obsessing or disturbing thoughts. That's one example of the use of the ritual.
Hey, real quick, John.
Yeah.
Can you sketch out what it looks like to use the ritual for that sort of specific purpose, rather than just as nuking the room energetically?
Yeah. So specifically to banish an unwanted thought,
Yeah.
or something. Yeah. So when you're performing the ritual, you basically visualize, at least for me, you take your thought that you have, and you kind of visualize it in front of you as you're drawing the pentagrams, and it's almost like the thought is in the center of the pentagram, and as you pierce the pentagram and vibrate the word of power, right, you're imagining it dissolving into the ether, so to speak. And doing that on all four corners really is helpful, at least for myself, to kind of banish that particular aspect of that you wish to banish. You could also use it, for example, if you want to protect your home, right? You would invoke, you would use the invoking ritual, or sorry, you would use the banishing ritual, but banish of fire, and invoke Mikael at all four corners, versus invoking, the four archangels. You would just invoke Mikael for protection. That's another example of how you could use it to, if you're in a new environment or something, then you're not sure, you're an unsafe environment, you wanted to kind of ensure your space is protected. That's one way to use it, is to invoke fire and call upon Mikael at all four corners of the space
Wow.
you're in. Yeah.
And I can just extrapolate from there just to think about all the different things you could do with it. Thanks
Right.
for giving me a little detail there.
Right, exactly. And that's the other thing is like this ritual is like it's kind of infinitely, you can use it in so many different ways, you know, and that's one example.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
quick question. Are you going to give us like a demo at some point? If so, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So yep, later in as a couple slides, I'll kind of explain, I'll break down the ritual a bit.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So side effects, you know, not that there's any negative side effects, but there are, you know, this is kind of like at least been my experience, the results of doing this ritual. On a kind of a microcosmic level, daily practice has the benefit of first bringing any sort of imbalance to the surface for healing. So I like this image of a magnet kind of, you know, sucking up junk, right? That's kind of the idea. It's like you can kind of see this as like you're forcing things from your unconscious out into the conscious. And you know, anything that's in balance within you, when you start doing this ritual daily, it's going to come out. And so, you know, for good or bad. So, you know, you could have unresolved traumas or emotions that you've blocked, you know, but by doing this ritual, you are commanding these things to be brought out to the surface because what you're doing is you're purifying yourself, right? You're trying to make yourself, you know, clean as energetically. And so anything that's inside of you, you know, that is not, you know, balanced, you know, must be balanced. And so in doing this work, you know, will bring that up. And so that is one of the kind of side effects, right? And so that's why it's kind of advised to invoke as well as banish. And so, you know, for my personal, you know, what I do personally is I'll banish at night and invoke in the morning, and that's kind of a good way to balance it out. So you're not overwhelmed with too much stuff coming out, or you're not, you know, just banishing everything, right? It's like okay, you're also invoking those energies, you know, good energies, right, to come into you, or the energies that you wish to kind of come into your life to help balance that out a bit more. Yeah, so this is how the ritual works. I love this quote from David Goddard, kind of really encapsulates one of the main purposes of the ritual. You know, when you're ceremonially drawing the pentagram, right, you're asserting in gesture the proportionate relationship between God and humanity and between humanity and nature, and thus reminding yourself and all other beings that the actions you perform are part of the divine order, and so affirm that what you say or do is done by one who knows herself to be an image of the Almighty One, right? And I just think that's a really nice quote because, you know, what you're doing is you're strengthening your own will by affirming the will of the One. And you're and when you're drawing the pentagrams, when you're saying the words of power, what you're doing is you're creating these symbolic images in your mind which resonate with these higher forces, and you're creating this bridge. And so what, you know, you're essentially reaching out to the higher realms and allowing them to come in, and creating that bridge so that they have a form to come into. Because you know, as Diane Fortune wrote, you know, the problem of our reality, which is called Malkuth in Kabbalah, is that there, you know, is one of links and chains, right? It's like the higher can't communicate with the lower as well. And so by creating these resonant forms, you're creating that bridge. And so that's really what's going on here when you're doing this ritual, at least in my view. So the first part is the Kabbalistic cross. Now, the Kabbalistic cross is an interesting ritual all its own. And this is, forgive me for this image, I found this online. It's very cheesy, but it actually does a good job of kind of, you know, demonstrating the basics of it. But, you know, essentially what this ritual, and again, this could be its own ritual all its own. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with just this, but its purpose is to bring light from what's known as Kether, right, which is the top, you know, where the one is, and you're bringing, or heaven, if you want to call it, you're bringing light down from Kether and grounding it into Malkuth. And so you are, essentially literally bringing that light down through your body and grounding it into the earth. And so, humans, the ultimate role of humans, right, is as a grounding point for the divine. And by pulling light down through your body into earth, you're just strengthening that connection. And so essentially it's pulling that light into you and into the earth, which acts as a way to equilibrate yourself, right? It's a way to kind of start the ritual out. And it also acts as a seal, right? So you're sealing your energy. That really kind of is the goal at the end. And if you'll notice the similarities between this and what Catholics do, right, is they do, like Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and it's typically performed, if it's kind of cheesy, but the image of like, if they sense an evil presence, they'll do this. And the reason they're doing that is because they're sealing, right? They're sealing themselves off. And that's one of the main purposes of this, is to seal and to hold that light. So when you do the ritual, the entire ritual, first you're drawing the light in, you're performing the ritual, and at the close of the ritual, when you do the Kabbalistic cross again, you're sealing it, and so it's sealed inside of you, basically. And the words of power here are, Ata, Malkuth, Vegubara, Vegejula, and Leolam, which essentially translates to "Thou art the kingdom and the power and the glory forever." And again, words have power, and these mean, these essentially relate, to on the Kabbalistic tree of life, Ata, Kether, down to Malkuth, Vegejula, Vegebura, and again, it's a way to bring the energy in, equilibrate the energy within yourself, and to seal the energy, so it's sealed. So your energy body is sealed. And so the second step in the ritual is drawing the pentagrams. So, take one. So, like I said, the ritual works on our inner and outer world, both inside us and externally in our environment. And internally, the ritual really, its purpose is to help bring us more into balance by working directly with the 4 elements within ourselves, right? So the 4 elements are earth, air, fire, and water. And of course, well, I guess 5 elements of spirit. And earth represents the physical aspects of life, right? Such as the body, health, material possessions, etc. It also includes practical matters like finances, relationships, things like this. And balancing earth involves really grounding oneself and ensuring stability, physical wellness, things like this. Air really symbolizes kind of the intellectual or mental processes, including thoughts, reasoning, the ability to analyze situations, communicate effectively, these sorts of things. And fire represents energy related to drive, ambition, creativity, willpower, passion, proactive energies. A balanced fire produces like creative action. An unbalanced fire is like burnout, aggression, that kind of thing. So, talking about astrology, Mars it represents the fire element. And so Mars, one of the negative aspects of Mars is war, but on the positive side, it relates to action, and taking action on something. Water corresponds to emotions, intuition, subconscious mind, things like this, capacity to feel, empathize, connect with others emotionally. So, all of these things are kind of equilibrated when one performs the ritual. And so, traditionally it started, and again, I should kind of preface this and say that when learning the Lesser Banishing Pentagram ritual, it's almost always begun with earth. And so you're banishing earth and you're invoking earth. And why earth is because earth represents all of the elements, right? And so and it represents balance. So you're balancing fire, balancing water, air, and earth and spirit all at the same time, because earth, we exist on earth, here in Malkuth. This is the final, I guess Kabbalistically, like this is the final stop for the light, right? So everything kind of is here on our realm, and so they balance Earth, and that's kind of the very beginning ritual that's taught typically, and it's kind of the one that's recommended mostly. But anyway, so you start here typically, so the bottom right or bottom left, and you kind of draw the pentagram in the air, and then you stab the center with your hand, representing kind of, and as you stab, you vibrate the word of power. So I'll kind of go into that. But before I do that, kind of the idea of you invoking and banishing, right? And so each element has a different pentagram, right? And so if you want to you kind of study this, but you invoke fire, you're starting from the upper, the upper left, right, and kind of coming down. Water, the middle left there. Air, right, the opposite side of that. And earth, invoking earth, you're coming down instead of banishing. And so the same with banishing, right? And so we kind of banishing fire in those ways. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, and why I wanted to show you this is because, I talked about earlier kind of how Earth is considered like the balanced pentagram, right? And so when you're banishing Earth or you're invoking Earth, you're working with all of the elements. And so that's why it's kind of recommended to kind of start with that. But you can invoke individual elements, and something very interesting happens when you do that. And so, for example, if you wanted to flavor your day with the element of fire, right? And so you wanted to be more creative, wanted to have more passion, drive, ambition, you can invoke fire. And what that does is, at least I found for myself, is that, it helps with it helps focus your mental processes on creative task, right? Or it basically flavors your day and with fire. And so you have more, you just find, I find myself when I do that is I have more energy, I have more drive, I'm more creative, all things related to fire. And same thing with water, air, etc. If I just invoke those elements, then I find that, my day is kind of centered around that element, which is really interesting. And so that's one of the interesting things about this ritual is that, you're working with all the elements, but you can focus and just work on one element, which is actually very, very interesting. And so you find that, your day kind of has that feel and that kind of like things happen in your life or during your day that kind of relate more to that energy. So for example, if you're doing water, if you're invoking water, you might find that your day centers around relationships or something dealing with emotions. Maybe you have some trouble with someone, and that's kind of brought out more, right? And it's like, well, it's brought out because you have to deal with that, you have to balance that. Same with air and etc. So it's just a very interesting thing to do. So, but again, it's a little bit, again, that's kind of a different way to look at this ritual, but it's something I found it to be very interesting. But the problem is if you do too much, then you could find yourself, having the negative side of that element. So for example, if you just like one time I was experimenting with fire and I invoked nothing but fire for like a week or two. And I found that eventually I would get irritable, moody. I would have like more aggressive kind of feelings, you know what I mean? Like anger. And it was like, because I'm not balanced, right? Because I have too much fire coming in. I have too much fire in my aura, my energy. So that's when you have to balance, right? You have to balance with earth. And so anyways, it's kind of like learning about all that. Now with the earth pentagram, it is interesting because what earth does is that and this is basically some people find that when they're evoking too much earth or they're banishing too much earth, that they start, if they have any kind of addictions or anything related to the earth realm. For example, some people will experience more like they'll experience being more lazy, right? And it's like, oh, they just feel like they have no energy. They're just like lazy. It's like, well, what's happening is like, again, those things in your unconscious are being brought up into your conscious awareness, and so and related to earth, right? So like if you have any addictions, that will be brought up and that will be kind of conscious, and you might find yourself being, having more of a tendency to kind of follow through with that, but that's because that's coming out. And so again, it's all about things being brought up from the unconscious. But yeah, anyways, this is like an infinite topic. You can really kind of go deep with the elements, but it's very interesting. So going back to the actual ritual and how it's performed, right? So you draw the pentagrams, right? And they're drawn into the air, and it's always usually visualized as the color blue. But again, if you're doing elements, you can, again, fire can be red or white, and you can kind of go through the different colors too, and corresponding colors. But after the shape is drawn, the practitioner, again, will step forward, their palms together, perform a stabbing motion through the center of the pentagram, and vibrate the corresponding word of power associated with that cardinal direction. I love this image. It kind of shows that, right? And you have these 4 pentagrams drawn, and again, like there's different schools of thought. Again, if you're banishing in an environment, walking to the 4 corners is probably the best way to do it, and that's traditionally what's done. And so you'll stand in the center of the room, and you'll walk to the 4 corners and banish from there, and kind of draw the circle. But I found myself is that, you don't necessarily need to do that. You could stand in the center and just visualize the pentagrams going to those corners too. You don't have to physically draw them on those different corners. I do find that if you're trying to intend to, if you're working with the pentagrams to clear energy from your aura or your energy body, you don't necessarily need to kind of draw in the 4 corners. But if you're using the ritual, if your intention is to use the ritual to clear a space or to protect an environment, drawing in the 4 corners is probably more effective. I haven't really experimented with that too much, but that's just from what I've read and what I understand. So but anyway, it's kind of a very simple ritual, right? So you just the key here is visualizing and drawing the pentagrams in the air. Before we go too much further, I do want to kind of talk about the words of power a little bit, and kind of the power of the Hebrew language, really. And it's a great book called The Alphabet That Changed the World by Stan Tenen. It's like book will blow your mind. It's fascinating, but it's essentially about about the Hebrew language and how it's a fundamental archetypal language, right? And so I love this quote from the book. So each Hebrew letter, when its name is pronounced, is also an ordinary Hebrew word, right? And Hebrew words are thus like acronyms made up of a row of other words. These letter names actually are not quite ordinary words. Rather, they comprise a series of archetypes, basic ideas that could indeed organize a world. And so what he's saying here is that the meaning behind like Adonai, for example, right? It's a symbol in Hebrew. It's just like a letter, but and it's also a word, but then it's also a descriptor of a living archetypal idea, right? And so that's the power of Hebrew. And it's also Sanskrit is also like this as well. So very foundational languages tend to have this quality that they speak more to archetypal concepts, and they get very, very deep. And it doesn't just mean one thing. It means like many different things. It's almost, you can almost consider it like, I don't want to say like a 4th dimensional language, but it really is like a multi-dimensional language. It's very, very interesting. So that's why and again, if you don't resonate with Western traditions or Jewish faith or anything like that, the words still have an impact and can still, and still have an effect, because they're not necessarily, tied to a culture. They're tied more to an archetypal idea, if that makes sense. So it's a very, very interesting topic. That's like kind of beyond the scope of this, but I highly recommend checking out his book if you guys are interested in this topic more. So again, the words of power, right? Yod-He, Veh-He represents the Tetragrammaton, or the what's known as the ineffable name of God in Hebrew tradition. It symbolizes the quality of air. So in the East, right, when you're stabbing the pentagram, vibrating Yod-He, Veh-He, right? And then moving to the South, right? Adonai means my Lord and represents fire. Ihe, right? In the West, translates to I am or I will be, expresses the internal and unchanging nature of God, represents water. And then finally in the East, Agla, which is shortened for Ata Gibor Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai. And that means thou art mighty forever, O Lord, and represents earth. And so again, drawing the pentagrams, stabbing, saying the word of power, and moving on to the next one. And then the third step involves invoking the archangels. Now, archangels are interesting. There are some schools of thought and some debate as to whether or not they are actual intelligences or if it's just, representations of the mind. I tend to fall into the camp that they are actual intelligence. And you're invoking these intelligences, right? Again, going back to what I said previously, you're creating a form that can house these intelligences, that resonates with these intelligences, so that these higher positive intelligences can embody, if that makes sense. And so the way it works, right, is that you draw the pentagram, say the word of power, and then when you're done all four corners, you then invoke the archangels on those corresponding cardinal directions. And it's very interesting. In one of the channeling sessions with Quo, he mentioned that Michael, one of the archangels you invoke, the position of his sword, when you visualize him, when you see him in your mind's eye, whatever the position of his sword can determine the presence of potentially negative entities in your space, and it can be seen as a warning. And so if his sword is pointed down, all is good, your environment's clear. When it's up, if it's raised for battle, like there might be something lurking nearby. I'm paraphrasing what Quoth said, and that's very interesting. That's a very novel way to look at it. I've never actually seen that in any books outside of that. So, and I have experienced it. Yeah.
There's a very good chance that was Carla's invention.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Really? Now, I've never heard this before, but I do know that she went to meticulous detail in visualizing the archangels.
Yeah.
That's not what I do. And I've never heard anybody do that before, but obviously it was very powerful for her. So she was able to invoke a lot of emotions that she already had about these biblical entities, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've it's speaking from my experience, I have actually noticed that myself. That Michael, and again, I might be, because I am, I've kind of raised Christian, so I have that kind of background, and in that, this stuff resonates with me very well because of that, I think. But Michael is the archangel, associated with protection, right? And so in battle, right, fire energy. And so him with the sword, I have found that if I do the banishing ritual, let's say something in my life is going on, and I might be in a negative state. If I'm in more of a negative state when I do the ritual, I have noticed that when I visualize Michael, the sword is up. And it's very interesting. And when I read that quote from Quo, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because it's like, almost as if he's standing guard, ready to go. And so, but again, I do have, similar to Carla, right? I do have that kind of Christian, association with the archangels. It might be different.
I in saying this, John, I do not mean to say that it's not a real thing. I totally think it is. And you find as you do rituals like this more and more that you come up with a kind of subset of details that you pay attention to that is meaningful, that is very subjective. For example, in my channeling preliminaries, I place a lot of emphasis on the spontaneous view of a color that a figure in my ritual is wearing, a scarf or the color of a crucifix or something like that.
Mm.
And I try to just say what it is. What color is that? Because you want to get your mind out of like trying to make it up, but you do want that. It gives you that spontaneous experience that feels like communication. And you can only protect that by being really, really, really honest with yourself, which is a great quality to have when you're doing ritual magic. So I think it's incredibly important to do stuff like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when well, if you guys, kind of are interested in kind of performing this ritual more yourself, you will find, kind of your own style, you know what I mean? In your own way of visualizing. It's common to, like Jeremy said, associating with color. You might visualize the archangels in their traditional form that people typically visualize angels as, right? Kind of like a Adonis male figure, or you might, female figure or something like that. So it's all about, your own internal background, what resonates with you. And some people use Celtic associations, some people use Egyptian associations. I don't resonate necessarily with those, so I don't use them, but there are, individuals who modified the ritual for Celtic, for Egyptian, for Greek, like they use Greek gods, which is interesting. So yeah, so it's all about what resonates with you and what you find helpful. And
Can I
so,
offer something again?
what's that?
Can I offer something again? I'm sorry to
Yes.
interrupt.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Interesting, and it's a great site for getting a lot of this stuff out of the way that
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess me and Steve often take it for granted. So, and now I forgot what I was going to say. Shoot. Oh yeah, as somebody who has done this for a long time, and I totally agree with what you're saying, it builds power over time. It also builds your ability to work with things that you can't necessarily address with language, and therefore you can't necessarily be taught by another person. Because of that, you have to be a very, very good teacher to yourself. And therefore, whatever you do with these rituals, do it that way for a long time before you start messing with stuff. It's very similar to the channeling preliminaries too, because once you've been doing the ritual for like 30 years, like Carla or Steve, you know what it feels like when it works, right? And a lot of times you can go directly to the feeling without using the symbology to reference the feeling. Like you have the ability to, now you have a vocabulary for yourself of these different energetic or feeling qualities, and that can be used. It can be used for efficiency, or if you needed to just banish real quick. And a lot of people do the banishing ritual in their mind. So if you can do that really quick because you know those feelings and you can invoke them at will. And if this sounds like the same way that Ra talks about the archetypal mind, that's exactly what I'm trying to think about right now. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
To me, it's super crucial in my practice.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. It's like, yeah, the more you do it, the more it just comes to you naturally, and the more you create those resonating forms within yourself, that you can tap into a lot easier. And a lot of this is about that. If you haven't done this, any kind of magical work before, it's about, again, we are in our perfect state, we are bridges to the higher. And so, we connect the lower to the higher, in the hermetic sense. And so, how do you do that? Well, you have to resonate with those higher energies. And so, and you have to have an understanding of what that feels like. And so performing the ritual is one way to get into the mindset, right? The headspace to do that. And I think it's really powerful.
It's good to follow the recipe verbatim at first. Then you know what you're messing with when you start messing with it. For example, I did the banishing ritual with Yadhe Valhe for about 3 years before I switched to Yod He Shin Vau He,
Mm.
what they talk about in the raw contact, if you recall.
Mhm.
And I noticed that the energies were very similar, so I didn't have to be worried. But I had a baseline. All
Right.
right, I'm
Right.
off my
No,
bed.
no, I absolutely agree. Yeah, so going, continuing on with like visualizing archangels, right? I mean, this is, in the East, Raphael, you just say very simply before me, Raphael. Well, not very simply. I want to say, preface this, that it's the one of the things with this ritual I found, and again, when I saw Jeremy perform this, it kind of was like, that's how you do it. So I do it when I do it, like I don't, I'm not trying to be quiet, but I'm just I kind of do it more to myself, and I don't really. When Jeremy does it, I've seen him do it. It's commanding. He's like putting his voice into it,
You
and
should
that's
see
like,
him do it. You
yeah.
should see him do it.
Who?
Jim McCarty.
Oh, Jim. Okay, yeah, interesting.
He is far more forceful than I am.
Yeah,
I
that's-
actually try to restrain that. We didn't. So this is an interesting detail, by the way, of the channeling intensive. It's the first intensive where I've never done the banishing ritual, not once.
Interesting.
I used like when we first did it, I would do it every day, and then I started being like, okay, just once at the beginning is fine.
Yeah.
And when we started doing it, Steve's, it just freaks the dogs out so much that this time he has that new puppy who's just like, let's just not do it. And I was like, this space is probably pretty clear. Like,
Yeah.
and it was with your words in my ears too, because I really do think I need, in order to do this, if I'm going to invoke ritual magic for it, I need to have more tools in my tool belt. And so I've been looking into that Rosy Cross ritual that you recommended. It's very intricate compared to the LBRP.
It is.
A lot to learn.
Yeah, it's very powerful too. Like, just like this, it's like well, it's different than this. I mean, this is more, clearing a space energetically. You can also use it to, again, do a lot of stuff. The Rosy Cross is like, I've heard it said it's like an astral lock, for your environment. You're literally sealing yourself out from anything that you don't want in.
It seems more delicate.
Yes, it's very delicate. Yeah.
Hey, John, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I was raised Southern Baptist, which is a whole different thing, but
Yeah.
but I find myself in more of a layperson religious camp. So in the sense that these archangels have little to no symbology, where does one go? This doesn't resonate with me per se, but the intent and that does resonate with me. Like, where would you, how would I proceed, or how would you recommend proceeding in that way?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't resonate with the archangelic names, specifically, again, the correspondences are, again, think of these as energies, not, intelligences, right? But they take many forms. In our West, we associate, in the Western religions and whatnot, we associate these energies as, we call them angels, Mikael, Uriel, but they have resonating forms in other religions and other cultures. If you don't want to use any name, you could invoke, because what you're doing is you're invoking the spheres on the tree of life, basically. And so, these resonating forms, or I forget exactly which spheres they're associated with, but you're essentially taking the energy, or trying to bring down the energy from these different spheres. And so, you could, use the names of those higher spheres, like Chokmah, Benai, Yasad, right? Like you could use that too, right? And it's to me, that's a little bit more complicated, in terms of like having to, memorize that. I think the idea of using an archangelic name like Raphael, Mikael, is because all of us, whether or not we associate with Christianity, we all grew up in a Western society, and so we all understand at a, maybe call it subconscious level, whatever, Raphael. We understand these names, and so that's why I think the Golden Dawn chose to use these names.
So
But
kind of a follow-up question is, and maybe you can, I know we're kind of over an hour and we probably still, so I don't want to take up too much of the group's time here, but maybe in a follow-up, in addition to sharing this, could you also, like, when we are invoking Raphael, you know, for the lay people like myself, what kind of are we holding in our hearts or holding in our minds when we're doing this invoking? Like what symbology is there? So if you wouldn't mind following up after all of this, I would love that.
absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just kind of I can, yeah, I'll definitely follow up with that, but I'll just kind of include that into this discussion here because I think that, you know, again, you're working with elemental energies, really, right? And so Raphael, air, right, associating it with air. And so one of the things that I did when I do is that I associate it with the feeling of air, right? The feeling of fire, Mikhail, the feeling of water. Like I'll visualize Gabrielle standing on a cliffside with waves, you know, kind of going. Uriel, earth, so kind of like earth, the ground, right? Things that resonate with that feeling. And so that's typically what I do personally. And so you don't necessarily have to have the association with the archangel. You can have the element too, and that's something that might be, you know, that might resonate more with you, or you know, but yes, but I'll definitely follow up with those associations. So, okay, so the last step in the ritual is the hexagram. And so, you know, before the closing with the Kabbalistic cross, you call forth the hexagram. This is known as the six-rayed star. And some versions of the ritual have the hexagram visualized above you, or more commonly, it's uttered by uttering the phrase, and in the column shines the six-rayed star. Now, the column refers to the middle, it's called the middle pillar. And so when you did the Kabbalistic cross, Kether, right, down to Malkuth, and you're creating that column, right, within yourself and visualizing that column. So within the column, within you, is the six-rayed star. And I guess you could think of that as Tippereth, right, the six-rayed star in within the column, right? And so and Tippereth is associated with the hexagram and the heart as well. And there are associations, I guess, if you want to, with green ray, you know, the green chakra and whatnot. So anyway, so but regardless, it's a visualization, and so you're visualizing the hexagram shining within or above you, and what it symbolizes is a higher spiritual presence and protection, and it represents the macrocosmic forces balancing with the microcosmic forces of the pentagram, essentially, you know, from a high level. I also kind of visualize the hexagram below me too, like I'm standing on the hexagram. It's just something, again, when you do the ritual enough, you have your own style. One of the things, yeah, so I'll visualize it like I'm standing on the hexagram. And I find that really helps to, you know, induce balance within myself too. And so, yeah, so then the final stage is, of course, the Kabbalistic cross again, which is a seal. You're sealing that energy inside. And then that's it. So for that ritual. So, you know, a couple of things here about it is again, faith and visualization are really the keys to the effectiveness of this ritual. And so again, like we were saying, you know, you may not resonate with the Christian or Jewish correspondences, and that's fine. You know, there are plenty of other examples of ways to do this. Using just the elements is one way. Using other corresponding names could work too. But like Jeremy was saying, really the point is that, you know, having something to focus on and to resonate with is important. And so getting familiar with those archetypal forces and getting good at visualizing them in your own way is important, because what you're doing again is you're creating the form that these energies can take hold, right? So visualization is very important. And you know, visualizing the pentagrams as you draw them, right? Visualizing archangels or the energies as you call them forth. The hexagram forming, you know, behind you or above you, within you. And of course, visualizing that pillar of light as it's coming from Kether down to Malkuth. You know, feel the energy as it's moving through your body. And you know, take your time with it too. That's like actually, you know, breathe, you know, and feel it coming down. And so that's really the keys to this ritual, right? You can do it, you know, it could take you 30 minutes to do it, you know, if you do it really well, or an hour, man, if you really wanted to kind of go into it, or it can take you 5 minutes, right? Again, like Jeremy was saying, the more you practice, the more you do it, the easier it is to visualize, and the easier it is to kind of get into that, shift your mind into that state, right? I guess. So yeah, but I do recommend practicing it daily. You know, banish and invoke. And I think that you guys will find that it'll change your life. Honestly, if you haven't done it before, it will change your life. Speaking of a personal experience, I've had, you know, like I used to get very, you know, I wake up drained. I'd have these, you know, it felt like, you know, entities, you know, that would kind of drain my energy at night. I would get all sorts of stuff happen. And after performing the ritual, it all went away, you know, and I find myself much better able to handle catalysts that come into my life, and I'm much better able to stay grounded and balanced, and it's overall, the benefits are innumerable. So I highly recommend you guys, you know, if you don't incorporate this into kind of a daily practice, I definitely recommend it. So